Hi, and welcome to the Self-Paced Learning Experience. This is the Oxford Comma tutorial. Many people think of punctuation as something that's only vital to the written word, but even everyday conversation depends on punctuation. For example, if you were to say, I need to pick up my cats, Malloy and Martha, it might be difficult for someone to understand what you mean. Are your cats named Malloy and Martha, or do you also need to pick up two people named Malloy and Martha? Because the meaning is unclear, this sentence can be referred to as ambiguous, open to more than one interpretation. Fortunately, there's a simple way to fix this ambiguity. Also, it uses the punctuation mark we see often, the comma. Let's see what happens when we add a new comma to the sentence from earlier. I need to pick up my cats, Malloy and Martha. As you can see, the sentence looks virtually unchanged except for the comma after the word Malloy and before the word and. This kind of comma is known as the Oxford comma. Also known as a serial comma, the Oxford comma falls before the words and or in a list of three items or more. This creates a slight pause before the last item in the list, making it clear that each part of the list, in this case my cats, Malloy, and Martha, is a separate item. Now that we have a basic understanding of what the Oxford comma is, let's take a closer look at how this punctuation mark is supposed to be used. First of all, I cannot stress enough that the Oxford comma should only appear in lists that contain three items or more. Let's see what happens when we add an Oxford comma to a two-item list. I hugged my grandfather and my aunt. So what's the problem with putting a comma before the and in this sentence? Well, if you read the sentence out loud, you'll notice that there's a slight pause right in the middle of the sentence. Instead of hearing, I hugged my grandfather and my aunt, you'll hear, I hugged my grandfather and my aunt. It's almost as if a new thought is supposed to begin with the phrase, and my aunt. This is because a comma followed by the word and can create a new independent clause, which is a new thought that has the same importance as the first part of a sentence. Let's see what our sentence will look like with the new independent clause used correctly. I hugged my grandfather, and my aunt looked at her phone. As you can see, the phrases I hugged my grandfather and my aunt looked at her phone are equally important to the action of the sentence. They can also work as two separate sentences. In a sentence like this, the placement of the comma before and makes sense. Thus, when you approach a sentence, you must look at how the word and is being used. If it's being used to separate two independent clauses, then adding a comma is just fine. However, if and is being used to join parts of a list, then the list must contain three items or more. Only then is it appropriate to use the Oxford comma. Now that we've discussed when not to use the Oxford comma, let's talk about how the special kind of comma helps to clear up ambiguity. To do so, let's look at a sentence that could benefit from the Oxford comma. I would like to dedicate this song to my parents, Cardi B and Bob Dylan. Just like the first example in this lesson, this sentence is definitely open to misinterpretation. Unless Cardi B and Bob Dylan had a secret history together, we can probably assume that the author's parents aren't Cardi B and Bob Dylan. However, at present, the sentence is unintentionally describing the author's parents in this way. This is because the sentence is accidentally using something called apposition. Apposition occurs when one word or phrase is followed by a comma and a word or phrase that defines or clarifies its meaning. Here's an example that uses apposition correctly. Gillian Flynn's debut novel, Sharp Objects, was published in 2006. In this sentence, the phrase debut novel is defined by the phrase sharp objects. This use of apposition is helpful since it gives us more information, which is the title of the novel, on the subject of the sentence, which is Flynn's debut novel. Looking at the previous example, let's fix this problem by inserting an Oxford comma. I would like to dedicate this song to my parents, Cardi B and Bob Dylan. Listen to how the sentence sounds when you read it out loud. The pauses between parents, Cardi B, and Bob Dylan make certain that we hear each of these terms separately. There's no more unintended apposition, and the sentence can't be misread. Thus, it can be said that the Oxford comma fights ambiguity by avoiding accidental apposition. We can wrap up by summarizing what we've learned about the Oxford comma. The Oxford comma is a comma that falls before the word and or in a list of three items or more. And it should only be used in this way, otherwise it will give the reader the impression that a new independent clause is starting. In clarifying ambiguous, unclear sentences, the Oxford comma eliminates unintended apposition in lists. In conclusion, one does not simply omit the Oxford comma. Thank you for listening. Take care.